Hi guys, so my name is Frank Tamre. I feel like I dabble a lot, or like I play around with a lot of mobile technologies. So I think mobile, I got into the foray with starting to edit some, like the Galaxy Tab, the Samsung Galaxy Mini. That was like a very long time ago. Some of you guys do not even know it, but you can Google it and you'll see the image. And then I moved, I think from there, I started playing around with like Java stuff, just trying to operate, or rather change the way the core Android operating system used to look like. And then I moved from there on, was doing a lot of like JavaScript web stuff. And so I started playing around with Cordova, really got into the hang of it all, with all this cross-platform stuff, because it felt really easy and natural for me. And then you'd easily kill like two birds with one stone, Android, iOS, and it's like deploy once and for all. And then I stopped and went native into like Java and Java stuff for a very long time, then switched over to Kotlin. Then Flutter came out. The funny story is I remember very, very well that there was this event in one of these communities, and I think like we were there, myself, Maureen, and some other people, and I remember just like saying like, yeah, this Flutter doesn't have a feature, it's not something that I would really like use. Fast forward a few months later, I was working as a Flutter engineer. It was very hilarious, and I really fell in love with Flutter and the way it was all this about like reactive programming, and putting like you could really express yourself very well with UI. And me coming from someone who has very strong UI skills, it really felt natural for me, where a designer could give you any design and my work to translate it would make a lot of sense, and everything is to like make sense for me. But now I work at Kiosk, but Kiosk, we do not use Flutter. Maybe we will, nowadays you never know what happens in the future. So that's what we're playing at the moment. So today I just want to talk about the following things, which is like state management, the state of state management, adopting GetX, the good, the ugly, and some learnings that I've picked along the way. And I'll try and the way I'm going to do this is because of the limited amount of time. I'm not going to do like a practical coding session. I have sort of like had this call or had a conversation with Maureen and said, hey, why not maybe in the future we can have a more detailed deep down on like how to actually go step by step with like adopting using GetX from start to finish, like a whole session where it's like coding, live coding from the start to the end. But don't worry, this is not going to be one of those killing you with slides sort of presentations. I'm actually going to go through like a sample app and just like explain some of the things that I got. So this is more of my experience with using GetX, and really want to give that general broadened overview that is not like from a beginner level, but from someone who's used it, using it, and from a critique sort of like level, and what things I wish would be there, and just again have that conversation with you guys. So don't hesitate to ask me any questions in the chat sections. I'll definitely answer them. So if we like, one of the very interesting things that sometimes we hear is state management, and sometimes guys start to wonder like, what is this thing called state management? And if you realize what state management is I feel like it usually creates like a lot of confusion when guys are starting out and be like this new beginner. I remember myself when was building this UI stuff, but I was not like putting state into it. And I was like, okay, sat down with a bunch of guys, asked them what is state management. And everyone was like, yeah, well, state management is managing state. And I was like, but I remember English, we were told you can't explain a word with another word. You have to like give me like practical examples. And there was nothing that actually made sense. Exactly. Some guys really explained it, but there was I don't think I ever met anyone. I have a friend of mine, his name's like Tanvik, he sat me down one time. I think we sat for like 2 to 3 hours. Went through different state management stuff. I left there, I was like, okay, it's given me the light, spent more time just like thinking about it. And then finally, when it made sense, I came up with a very simple explanation. So let's consider like this is one of there's an app called Fudo that, that I was working on. It's a failed app, so I can talk about it. Myself was brought in to sort of like help consulting, like bringing it up. This was just like in between me having done Snap and just before I decided to take a whole year off. And what Fudo was supposed to do was, it was supposed to be this app that would help people to order food, and specific kind of food that guys were ordering were that we were not interested in you getting like food, let's say like KFC stuff, fries and all those things. Your work was just like, you could sit down and say, hey, I want to eat healthy or vegetarian for the next 1 week, and you would subscribe, and then you have like this menu that is sent to you. And instead of us using like the likes of KFC and the like, we'd have specific designated area where you choose whether you want to cook food or you do not want to cook food, and then it will be delivered to you to your house. So it was a very interesting one in that the former students had taught and done a concept like that, but this one went deeper and deeper into like trying to get people to either, if you want to cook option, you can get the ingredients, or the other alternative was you would actually buy the food. So like if you consider something like that, if I'm still going to explain what state management is, you'd see what state is here is, so think of it this way: you've made an order of a food item. Say you want to order something like rice. I want fried rice. And so when you go there, you choose like fried rice, you have to move and say, there's this one page, maybe you'd have a list of all your items, you say this is fried rice. But then if you go to the next screen, for that matter, is you'd be moving from list of products to the next screen, which is like your summary, or like the orders that you've made. And also you'd have another one where you'd be able to save like, oh yeah, so I'm saving this food stuff that I usually frequently order, or we generate this from the backend and say, maybe you're thinking of ordering this food. Now, what would happen is when you start off the application, it's blank. So what happens when someone clicks on like, how does it move to the other side? Someone would say, yes, you can use a database and all those things, but you can quickly do that by just changing the state of that image, or changing the state of that page itself, or even the state of that object, in terms of you have a card that has this food item and someone needs to add quantities to it. And so by default, it starts with 1. So when you do plus, it needs to add to like 2, 3, 5, like that. And so changing that number is what is usually called handling that state of that item. In that it's changing from one number to the other like that. And so it's increasing in life, and you can reduce it, and it can appear in a different screen. So you can handle instead of like one card in terms of like the frequency and the number that is there, and you're also populating this other, which is the total amount that is reflected. And so you add this number and it is reflecting on this other end. On the other hand, also is that page where shows the cart items that you have, checkout page, for instance, it would have that item that you've actually ordered. And so that is what I would say state management is. And if you think about the current state of state management, as we speak, there are around 14 state management approaches that you can use. And I kid you not, I need to look at like my measurements here. And it's like all of these things have the following of this 14. And when I say 14 management approaches, I am not lying. There is, you can count it with me, there's provider, there's riverpod, set state, inherit widget, and inherited model. Okay, well, you can separate them or use them at the same time. You also have, I think it's Redux, Fish Redux, Block. You have obviously Get It. There's Get It, then there's GetX, there's MobX, there's Flutter commands in detail. And then you have Binder, you have, States Rebuilder, and you have this triple path. And so these are like all the 14 state management approaches. And the funny thing about it is, within the Flutter world, is that this is not like a permanent number. It's a very opinionated number. And because of all these opinions that exist about this is the best way to handle state, and even you have guys who like fight amongst themselves in the community that this is the best way, this is not the best way. Because again, Flutter being new and it being reactive programming, you're bound to have people with a lot of opinions. So, and the interesting thing is that I was looking at it is like there's one, every few months there's a new approach of like handling state that is termed as the best that is out there. And so for me, who has coded for some time, is like you have to, I usually say you have to choose a button. Oh yeah, okay. So you have to choose the sword that you'll die on. For me, that's what I usually say. And the reason why I say choose a sword that you're going to die on is because all these things are going to change. You just need to choose one and understand it well. All these approaches, which is very interesting, is that they're all related to each other. They don't change. They're all related to that. If you understand one very well, it's easy for you to take those learnings from one side and move them to the other one. So because of this, because of the fact that there's one every new months, for instance, is for me, I think what I decided was that I'm actually going to just make a decision and say, no, I'm more interested in choosing one thing that I love, and that's the one that I'm actually going to focus on. So I'm not going to like waste time learning 20 or 30 things. I'm just going to learn one thing. And that one thing that I'm going to learn is way enough for me. And so what I chose was GetX. And I'm going to talk about why I actually chose GetX. The first state management approach that I was using, which was like at my place of work, was MobX. And for me, I looked at it and I felt like it was too complicated because we were building this very large scaling application. It was really huge. It was going to serve millions of people. And so you can imagine like working on that code base is already like you're writing a lot of code. I looked at it. Yes, it was good. It was nice to like start it off with, but I felt like it felt a little bit harder. I looked at Block. Again, this is my opinion. Someone else might be saying like, well, that's a lie. Well, that's a lie. That's fine. This is my opinion. It's a very opinionated talk, by the way. And I remember looking at it and I looked at Block. I looked at MobX. There was also Riverpod, but I felt like they were very, either it's too light, either it's doing too much, either there's a little boilerplate code, either it's like I have to write all this extra code and all these concepts that I need to learn. And they're like sub branches of that. There are different ways in which people are talking about handling a specific thing. Until I settled on GetX. And I think GetX was by accident. It was one of those things that YouTube brings to you. So I would actually credit this to YouTube algorithm. And so I was like, oh, okay, wait, let me spend time with this. And so I looked at it was like a 6-minute video or something like that. Then went to the documentation, spent time, started building something around it. And I really hate examples that people give with counter apps. And so I moved away from counter apps and I was like, okay, fine. Why would I want to adopt GetX? And some of the 3 things that really drew me to it was the way it was, was the way it had been planned, in that you had things to do with the way it was, And so the way it had been, the simplicity of it and so many other small things that really attracted me to it made me understand like, hey, yes, it is termed as it's a state management library, but I really strongly feel that it should not even be classified as it. It is like you calling GetX just does like state management is doing disservice to it because it has so many other things out of the box. GetX does not have an organization. It's maintained by one person. So I do not work for them. Neither are they paying for this session unless they talked to the organizers secretly and funded them. I am not aware of that. What I'm doing is I'm just giving my opinion, yeah. And so how I went about adopting it is currently it's 4.61, but I think I started using it way earlier than this, dealing with it. There's 4.61, but then there's 5.0. There's a beta version that's currently here. That's like you can even start playing around with experimental features on 5. It's a very interesting community that you can also like get in and like, code base that is still, well, I wouldn't call it young at this moment, but it's interesting. There are issues there, you can go and solve it. So why I actually chose, for me, GetX was that the thing that I'd mentioned earlier, it was just not about it being, this state management thing, because it had other things inside that actually brought more things to it. I really, really felt like it was more or less something that was more of a framework. And for this, why I actually classify it as a framework is that you'd have different things that I felt like were really core that were being handled already by GetX. And I was like, this is really fantastic. So one of the things there was that, and I really loved it. And in terms of like framework, they tackle one of the key things that I think anyone who's starting out in like GetX, I would say, or any form of state management, I would actually give you this approach for like the best way for you to easily make quick decisions on whether you want to use that specific state management library or approach or not. And for me, I think basing it on this is one of the first things that I think I was interested in were 2 things. The first one was I looked at how do they do their route management, because this is usually like a problem maybe every time you have like all this reactive or cross-platform applications. Again, I started working from Cordova, so I pretty much would say I've really played around with that bit of architecture, and I have a good understanding of like what it means to move from like one area to the other, or like having all this cross-platform stuff where you're writing one code base, but then you're maintaining it to iOS, to Android, to web, to desktop, and the like. And so for me, route management was like, okay, so does it have it or not? And I looked at it and I was like, okay, they actually do have it. Very interesting way in which they handle route management. And I looked at it and I was like, okay, that's very interesting. And on top of that, it has a very nice way of handling dependency injection. Not that other methods do not, but for me, I felt these two things were the killer. And I used to say, like, it's a doctor DNR. It's a doctor framework because it has dependency injection grounding, and you also have route management. Now, the reason also why I was like, it has this principle was I said, like, it has these 3 threes. And these 3 threes for me were, when I say 3 threes, I mean, there are some principles, and then there's also like this, there's principles, and then there's like this philosophy. And in terms of like principles, for me, I felt like it did a lot of justice with the way it wanted to handle like some of these things. And so in terms of like the principles and also the philosophies that it had, was that the first 3 principles for me were, you have performance, you have organization, and you have productivity. So performance in terms of that, you see with every code base, the more not legacy, I think the word is, the more boilerplate code you have, the more it starts impacting on the general performance of the application. And so, for instance, if you want to just say when someone does something here, it will take them to this other route. The problem is, if you have a lot of boilerplate code, the system of the application needs to do so much before it can actually react to that, compared to if it's a very light way telling you, like, just do this and then you move to the next screen. The other bit is organization. For me, I have looked at it, and whenever, like using GetX for me felt like it was something that was already like nicely or interestingly thought out. And by this, I mean, you have already from the start, there are small, I call them nice features that exist in it, in that there's no, oh yeah, there's this concept of like, there are stateful widgets, yes, but then they're not like wound in there. You don't need to like write it expressly and tell people. But the fact that you can easily decouple both the logic, like the way, let's say, block does it. You have like business logic is separate, the view is separate, and your presentation logic is separate. Like that philosophy driving GetX, even if you look at the sample documentation of like some of these example applications and then start building yourself from there, for me, really got in touch with me. And me, I come from this place where design for me is everything. The UI design, the way you present it is everything, especially for mobile applications, because you have to delight the user. The last bit, which is more or less around productivity, is because of the way it does not have a lot of boilerplate code, you have, it's quick for you, it's very straightforward. So it really saves a lot of development time. I read somewhere that we have all these keystrokes that we need to spend time on and really reduce. You have a certain number of keystrokes from the time you stay alive till the time that you leave this earth. It's like you have to be very specific with how are you spending your time writing code. Now, these are just like 3 philosophies that drew me to it, right? And these are like the 3 principles that drew me to it. But then there are 3 philosophies that actually guide. Now I say 3 P's, 3 threes, yeah. So there are a total of 6 things, which is like classify them into both principles and philosophy. And so for me, it's like, how do we handle routes? And so I'm going to spend time talking about routes, because I know there are other 3 things under this, which is like handling routes and the other one. So when I was adopting it, the first thing I said is, it's good for you to start spending time seeing the way that approach handles routing, for that matter. And so the way you can do this normally with Flutter is you can use it without named routes, where you've not named them there. But for me, I don't like it, because I feel like this is like a bad practice. And again, I am not talking from a point where you're doing 3, 4, 5 screens, or you need to move from one screen to the other. There's like 5 or 6 screens. At that moment, yes, you can get away with the way it is. But then when I'm doing all these like large scale applications, I really prefer to have like named routes. And how I do named routes is very easy. It's like I create it's like a subfolder where I call it routes, and inside it, because we are deploying to different platforms, so it depends on what has been agreed on. So currently Flutter can support Android, iOS, desktop, and web. And so I create all these like routers inside, and what happens inside the routers is I will put in my code that sort of like names, like there's this route called, let's say, menu, there's checkout, there's pricing, there's offers, there's notifications. I've listed all of them there. So why do I use routes the way I use them this way? Why am I using this approach especially? And this is like a GetX thing. Just like the way I prefer to organize my work is that with this, it's easy for me to pass on the relevant theme there. So if it's Android, I can run an Android theme that is customizes the app to that way. I don't know if you've ever used apps that are like, they're like cross-platform, but they are not, they feel Android-esque, but you're on iOS, or they feel iOS-esque and you're like on Android, you know? Or it looks like a desktop app, but it has a feel for, you know, it has a feel for desktop-ish. So it has a desktop, but it feels like it has a feel for like iOS there, mobile for that matter. So that's the thing that I go for, where I was like, okay, I don't want this to be that way. I put my routes there. And so the beauty of naming all your routes inside here is just if I want to go from one screen to the next is I just like put that screen name that I've actually given a custom name and put it there. And so if you have your screen that you're calling menu, you'd put it as menu there. You have a checkout, you have your checkout. So when this is pressed, let it carry over to the next one. And so that's like the first philosophy of it all, where you're talking about routes, you put your routes inside. It's easy for you to like layer this with it. And this is like one of the many, one of the three philosophies of how it actually does that. And for me, I'd actually say trying it out, it takes a lot. It's like a change of philosophy, especially if you're starting without named routes. And that's why I didn't name it here. It's not like a practice that I use or we use in most of the projects, like let's say we're doing with other guys. And the beauty of this is that, as I say, like that addition of themes is really good for that matter. Then there is the whole bit where now we talk about state management. And I'll just spend just some time here and to say, when you do state management with GetX, yeah, and so there's like two state managers for this matter. You can use the get builder function, or you can use more or less like a reactive state manager, which is like a GetX or a BX for that matter. And for these ones, I can assure you, it's very interesting how we you just need to like add all of these like states and like at the very points that you're adding them is you're either using .obs or obx. Initially, I know when someone starts out, they feel like, what does obx or obx? Why are you using that? And so I quickly learned, like when I was explaining to other members of the team when you're starting out, and I'll give you like the learnings that I sort of like picked when you're trying to do the adoption, was that this just stands for observable. Put this, I sort of like encompass or like add like a full stop to like the thing that I want to be observed. So if it is a menu item that someone is checking out, just like a .obs, meaning, hey, observe. The dot is like, hey, and then the last part is, what do you want me to do? I want to observe something. And that's what like, I sort of like found it to be very interesting in that it looks very simplified, but there's a lot of power behind it that is actually helping you out to like run. And those are like some of the approaches that I really loved about GetX, where if I want to do something, it's really straightforward and I really do not need to spend like more time like being worried about it. The other bit is also dependency management. Anyone who's done reactive programming for some time will tell you, not even reactive programming in general. It's one of those things like, yes, you will use it, but it gets to a point where you actually have to like decide and say like, okay, so how are you using this dependency management, you know? And for me, this one here is more, okay, how are we going about it? You know, how are we doing this whole dependency management part? And so for me, it felt like when I'm using dependency management for that matter, it felt easier with GetX because it had a very simple like solution, because you use like controllers. And so it's easy for you to access it from a certain view, you know, without like, you don't need to like inherit something or a context or inherit this from that. You don't need to do that. So what you do is just like, you have to instantiate a class within a class, but then that's what you typically do, right? But then you see with GetX, you have to do that get instance, which will be available throughout your application. And so you use it. When you don't want to use it, it's easy, like you can easily like kill it there. You don't need to like use it, and it doesn't really impact on the performance of the application. So that is how you would like, we have sort of like, that is how I've like consistently been adopting it. There's more to it, obviously. But it has been a very interesting journey, like adopting it. Now, over and above like adopting it, I wouldn't say like it has been amazing all the time, because it's like the ugly side of it. And one of it is like, if you're moving, especially from one approach to the other, it can feel really, really simplified. That sometimes you even wonder, like, am I really sure this is working? Like, you know, that thing where you're submitting code, it's working, but then you're thinking to yourself, no, there's more. And so you can really spend a lot of time like second guessing yourself on whether some of those things make sense or not, or do not make sense. And because of this simplicity, I feel like most people who are like writing code and they're moving away from the others have this feel like, no, it's not doing enough, it's not the best because it's not handling this and that. But then you start putting it with like performance benchmarks and how much time you're saving by trying to implement some of these features or the state management libraries, you see it's like, it's actually working. So that simplification sometimes can get really bad. But hey, we are developers. And I remember the quote that, what was his name? I think it was Steve Ballmer or Bill Gates said something about he loves lazy developers, you know. By lazy does not mean that you're not smart, but it's like you're trying to see how can I quickly save time by implementing a feature, maybe with fewer lines of code, but does not mean that with fewer lines of code, everything is amazing. And so because of this simplification, sometimes when you get new people joining into the team, they get confused because they do not understand, like, how are you doing this? How are you doing that? And so they need a lot of like lead time before they get up to speed with it. And that's what I saw that oversimplification does. The other bit is because there are not so many production apps that sort of like GetX can write home about. People tend to sort of like shy away from it, you know. So someone feels like, oh no, they just build these like example applications. We don't have anywhere that is there compared to maybe the other state management approaches. But the beauty is this number is sort of like increasing. And I know sometimes when you sit down and you're making decisions on what should we use for scale, and you hear, let's say, oh, there's this food ordering app, Block, for instance, you tend to sort of like go to Block. And that I think is one of the things that I've seen, because then you see it's easy for you to say, I've seen it being implemented there, so then I can actually implement it here. That is what I would say is like, because there are not so many of them, that's like an ugly side of it. And so what would I say are like the good things that I've noticed so far? So there's very little code that you write. And for me, this one saves time. This is like productivity. So like fights against each other. Because of that little code that you're writing, there's a lot of developer productivity in that you do not waste time writing maybe 5, 6, 7 lines. You're just doing like one line. Because, you know, 5, 6, 7 lines multiplied times an application that has up to like 200 activities or screens for that matter. What do you do at that moment? You know, so you have a lot of things that you need to write. And personally, being a huge fan of, yes, we are talking about microservices, but how micro are they? Are we separating UI, and how simpler can we separate this UI? I really love the way like starts to adopt that bit. Second bit is simplicity, which you're saying would work, yes, against and for this. If you have new people joining who've never handled state management before, their lead time is really fast because they easily understand, like, oh, so if I want to observe this thing, I just add a .obs, like, yeah, okay, cool, awesome, so move on. Compared to someone who has been using, let's say, other state management libraries for that matter. So transitioning from guys who are simplicity is that it's bad for the guys who've been using the other state management libraries, because they need to unlearn that and sort of like understand and accept that doing this the simpler way is easier. Yeah. And then one of the other things I think I loved was the fact that there's, again, this is like based on what for me was working out, in that validation, they are really covered by GetX, you know. I don't need, you know, like with the other, so like with the other ones that I was using, you'd really need to do like a lot of validation, in that you start from, like, I want to validate like an email and a password field. So I have to like add this, add that, add this other library that does this other part. This one does all this other validation. And so for GetX, it like handles this for you when you start like working on it. So you don't need to install another, like a separate validation package. The other bit is where, how do you handle internationalization? Because you see, for me, I'm doing internationalization, and like I usually mostly handle like different screens, different countries. And so you're probably doing left to right, right to left, French, English, Swahili. How does that look like? You know what I mean? So can we change, for instance, can I change like a translation? How do I handle it faster? So, and this is like where it gets like a little bit very interesting on the translation part, internationalization rather, in that you see when you talk about internationalization, there's several things that you're talking about. There's the language strings being changed. There is the change of the UI, where I was like working on that because I worked on a right to left and left to right feature, plus also adding French to it. So how do you like do that? Singulars, plurals, how do you change those parameters, you know? How do you, you know, change that locale? And it's also easy with GetX because with, when you want to change that whole application's locale, you just use the word get and it's like, it's easy for you to play all through the application compared to if you're using this other way. So that's with the internationalization. The other bit that I think I've loved it is when you talk about, so I told you guys I'm a heavy UI person. And so multi-screen support theming is really good for me. So it comes in, it's like something that I really, really love. So then you have your dark theme, white theme, dark light, and I usually have like celebratory ones. So for instance, for the Fudu app that we were doing, there was a bit where if it gets to 25th, you change the app's theme to be more Christmassy. So yes, we are from Africa. We do not have snow in most places, but you'd add like a snow effect on like all of those. Just like change the theme and add like snow on top of them. When there's like, because I nowadays you quickly realize like, I remember our UX person was telling us, oh, by the way, there's also Halloween that you need to add. And I was like, what? Why do we have Halloween? Because Halloween felt more or less like some witchcraft thing in Africa. I was like, yeah, we'll add it there. And so you can easily change your theme and like even put like timers to it. Like when this thing happens, change the theme and like you can change the theme for the whole application with that. And also multi-screen support where now if I'm handling like large screens, small screens, it's easier with GetX. It's also easier to change multiple themes with GetX. I'm not saying that the work to be done is like, oh yeah, just like put this thing and that's it. No, there's like a lot of thought that we put into it, but then like switching between themes is easier for the whole app. So we can remote push it, or we can also just like put it as an option where someone wants to enjoy like a Christmas festivity and they can change the theme of the whole application. And so those are like some of the things that for me felt very strong. I know there are other benefits that are out there, but for me, those are not like the things that really drew me there. But for me, it was like, am I looking at the design part? Am I looking at translation, validation stuff, and simplicity for that matter? And so what are the lines that I picked from this, like, especially when you're adopting? One is hackathons. These helped. We have internal, and I've become a really huge fan of this. I really usually try an organization I go to, like, how can you implement like a learning, like a hackathon thing system within the organization? So we have hackathons where we quickly get up to speed with what's happening. We build our skills from there. We quickly start building small things, which are not counter apps, because building a counter app, I feel like that should be abolished. And please, if you give demos to people, do not use counter apps. I feel like counter app really does a lot of injustice. Yes, it shows the whole power of like state and everything like that, but I feel like you can do more than that, you know, like showing someone multiple screens and moving from one screen to the other and changing state from one screen to the other. That would probably be better. So doing all these hackathons where we're going through something together to learn a certain concept really helped us out. Initially, there was a lot of like pushback, but I remember when guys were like within the team and all of us are like consultants, was like spending time to like build our skills up was really fun. The other bit is the documentation really helps because I like the way they've actually categorized all these features. So if you want to learn about like storage, for instance, or route management, they have like a whole like wiki where they explain to you how it is. And the beauty is you can easily like ask a question, and because it's been maintained by someone and other people also have interest for it. And the fact that yes, it is growing, but it's not as huge as the other state management, maybe the other popular state management libraries that exist already. And for me, I feel like the fact that there's usually like a benefit and disadvantage to this, that it's owned by this one person who's maintaining it. It's a personal project for them, but they've made it like open source. That with something like go down, they don't have the finances to like make it bigger. But I've always felt like sometimes some of the solutions that come from large corporates are, sorry to say, but they can have a lot of limitation in terms of like the complexity that is usually brought in, you know, and so the processes and the amount of time it takes to sort of like even put a change, and it has to go through like, oh, is this important? All those decisions takes a very long time. But I love the way the documentation is really quick and you can come in and actually just make a change to it. The other bit I learned is you have to approach GetX with a very, very open mind. And this is it looks very easy to say, but if you're like, I remember for me, I was like encountering all this stuff to do with state, and I was already like using elements of it in like Java and like mobile programming, but I really had to think like to really fully understand it, spent time, and I was explained to how to use, let's say, Qubit, MobX, Block, but still it was not making sense until I came and learned. And I remember the last word that my friend told me was, hey, just forget everything, and try and like think from, from a very like starting point. And I think that open mind really helped me, because with GetX, I think it has really helped like boost the performance. Releasing things that are really like awesome and amazing is really fast. And I think this is because largely that first initial step of like going with an open mind. So that's, I think, the last slide for me. But then in summary, what I would say is, for me, what I've actually picked out from like GetX that matter is, I know, yes, would have done code and like written out code, but I really said like, hey, let me just talk about my experiences with doing it. And now welcome like questions on like how to approach it. Because I know some topics like this ones are usually very, very opinionated. And so someone else might say like, well, why would you do this? Or, but just in case you have any questions on like GetX or anything that I've talked about, I would appreciate. So the joke I usually make with the organizer is that I usually say, if there are no questions, they understood. Yeah. So thank you so much for really welcome guys to ask questions. But I'm gonna check like the Q&A section. Yes.
All right, that was an amazing session. Personally, I haven't done anything with GetX, and it feels great to get the insights from you, especially that you've practically implemented it in various applications. So anyone who has any questions can shoot them. So as we wait for questions, I have this question, Frank. With GetX, is it possible to implement like various state management methods within the same application? I mean, using GetX at the same time using another method for state management, or it's only advisable to use one throughout the app?
Okay, so the thing is it possible? Yes. Let me start with that. Is it possible? Yes. And I'll tell you why. So the Fudu app, when we picked it, I was not picking it from scratch. It was being used. They had put Block, and I feel like, okay, I know there are guys who use Block, and I'll really say, and maybe there are even dev experts who are here. And they're probably like pushing out Block, and maybe they're even Googlers here who are like talking about it, or like other guys who are like totally invested into this. I'd really say this. For me, the way I saw it is, we were doing small adoptions, for that matter. The only thing that happens, Maureen, I'll tell you the truth, is when you start adopting it, it's like when you're doing the PRs, especially where you have multiple files, where you have this one happening and this other thing happening on this other side, is you really can't do it. Let me give you a process that you can't like break it in between. For instance, you can have portions of Block in the food ordering place. So like moving from one state to the other till you check out, you can use Block there. But like putting it in between, unless you're doing something like theming, something that is not connected to that whole pipeline, yes, it can actually work. So if you don't put, let's say if you put it in, this is a screen, I want to change the theme. I can use another state management to handle the check-in, the checkouts. Let's say if it's like booking hotels, yeah, check-in, check-out, or yeah, pick the dates, display to the user and everything. I can use it there. But then you can have GetX, let's say, managing the UI. And I feel like it's usually a very nice way to quickly start using things like, oh, how can we play around with themes, for instance, and start changing. The initial part, there's a little lead time when you do the pull request, or you're doing like a code review, before you do the merging. But over time, it's easy for you to start getting rid of it. However, I would not advise to use two for the same process. Maybe if it's like it's moving slowly by slowly and you're trying to sort of like move from Block to GetX as you're learning all these approaches, why not? I think there's one thing I didn't mention also that is I think it's a friend of mine who was telling me, yeah, if you're doing that talk, I think they saw the post and they're like, please mention storage. And they didn't mention it. And I know they expected you to put in the slides. But I was telling him, I was like, yeah, but you know, it's not like something there. So that's the thing. That's what I saw. Yeah, so that's what I'd say, Maureen. It's like, for me, it felt that way. So you can easily like adopt this. You can adopt this like everywhere, and you can use it in multiple places the way you want to, but you'd be adopting it using different things. You can't use it with one thing. You can use it with multiple things and not one thing only. So that's what I'd actually say.
Thank you for that. Yes. I see Alfred also has another question. So he's asking, do you use single or multiple controllers, benefits, disadvantages?
Okay, so for me, I prefer to use like separate controllers. I mentioned I am a fan of decoupling or microservices, and then the question normally is how micro can you get? So there are some places where you would be told, guys, I have separated it, but that's like they have not separated it. So one of the things I'll actually tell you for sure is using multiple controllers is one of the benefits is here. So let me start with the disadvantages. Disadvantages, obviously you have to spend more time like correcting this code and like writing it. Pull requests to like look like you're writing a lot of code. But the beauty is when you start doing, if you're doing like behavior driven or test driven development in Flutter or in any form of thing, and you know, for mobile, it's tricky. It's such a small tool, but it's really powerful. So for me, I'd say, I'd really say like, it's better because when you use multiple controllers, it's better for you because you really start to separate concerns. So yeah, that's what I'd actually say for that bit. I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, okay. I hope so too. So he has another question. So how do you personally handle reactivity in a file in a performant way?
Okay, so performance is a very it's a very wide topic. So you can tweak small things as you go down. So if you look at the way GetX is organized, or like not even GetX, Flutter in general. Flutter is more, it's like an RX. I usually say it's an RX sort of like framework, you know. And that's the thing that you get with like doing UI. When you think about UI fast and you want to display these things to the users fast. Now, when we talk about performance, on the other hand, there's so many other things that actually start to impact on performance, especially of applications. The first thing I would actually say is this: when you look at GetX, right? You can enable that whole reactive and sort of like the simple state manager functions in your controllers. And what you do is you just like extend all your controllers from the GetX controller. So you'd have, let's say, we go back to like that application I was talking about. So you have like a checkout, right? Or like favorites a screen. And so you want to have like a controller that handles that. And so you'd have like something like a favorites controller, and then it extends the GetX controller. And I think that actually starts to make it, that's like reactive, yes. But then now, in terms of performance, now it's how are you actually writing the code? How are you, like what's the size of like images and things like that? There's so many other things that really come into play, and we can get into a whole conversation around performance. It's a very interesting topic for me to give a talk on because I've been a fan of tweaking performances. So I guess it's very deep. It's not like one thing, it's not like a silver bullet that you can use to fix it, Alfred. I guess these are usually different things that you need to tweak in terms of the code. What are you optimizing? You know, and you can actually test in terms of like what are the lags that actually exist. Yeah. Hope I've answered.
All right, that's great to know. And Alfred's third question is, when you fetch data from APIs, how do you integrate with your apps?
Okay, interesting. So when you're fetching data from APIs, how do you integrate? Okay, it feels like a very general question. So is this, so okay, so let me try and answer this in this way. I think there have been talks around handling things to do with fetching data using API calls in Flutter here, maybe for that matter. So there's usually like dependencies that you can use, from HTTP, from now you handling that whole bit where you say, hey, I want to get this thing that happens. So I make a network request, and then once I get that network request, I sort of like I can convert it into like a custom object, and then there's a class that handles it. And for me, I love like thinking through this in terms of like mobile, where am I changing? And then so once I like get that result for its own, is there something that handles how's the data coming back to me? Do I want to change it to be some form of like a JSON data? And then once I change it to some form of like a JSON data, I now convert it to this like class, like a list or a map for that matter, and then get it, pass it somewhere. Once I pass it, that's when I can get it, and then I display the data to someone. And as I'm doing it, so how do I, it's a very interesting question. I've realized it can get complex, but very specifically, I would say when I'm doing this, I usually prefer to do this thing called threading, where as something is happening, show the user something else. So this is more, I'm loading images from the backend, right? And I want it to display to someone like there's this images of food and this description. So as it's loading, I would put like a schema effect to sort of like it's loading, it's loading. It's like a best practice so that someone is not wondering like, hey, what's happening to the app? Because users will want to click onto 5, 10, 20 things at once. So that's what I prefer to do. Like I would handle both the UI side, and as something is happening on the backend, I'm sort of like putting that threads to say, as this is doing, wait this other function to happen. More or less like some form of like a coroutine approach in that, that you would use for that matter. So yeah, that's how I'd answer it. It's a very, I like what Alfred has done. He's given me ideas of like 2 more talks. Maybe I'll submit them to Maureen and see whether they'll be accepted for these APIs, handling APIs and making data calls, and how I sort of like would do it. And maybe this one will try and do like pick an app and even like give you guys like an example for how you do it. The only unfortunate thing with this specific talk was that I was using applications that were having IPs, so you can't sort of like share the code base to everyone. Yeah, but that's what I would actually say. Yeah, but thank you, Alfred, for these questions. They've actually given me 2 new ideas of talks. Yeah, Marie, over to you.
Yeah, too. That's interesting. I was not thinking of it from that perspective. So great, and we'll be glad to host you in a next talk, maybe later on in the year, to speak about handling these API requests.
Yeah, cool. Done. Down right now.
All right, no worries. So Said is also asking, I would like to open a Flutter chapter in Mombasa, bring in enthusiasts and developers, also foster relations with Flutter Kenyan community and bring in speakers to host local campaigns here. That's a nice initiative side. If you don't know how to start like a Flutter meetup in Mombasa, kindly get in touch with me, then I'd lead you to the right people, especially from the Flutter team, who will help you with that, creating the Flutter Mombasa meetup and organizing events.
And you're a GDE, so she knows the right people. She knows the right people. Trust you. I would be willing to come and talk. The fun fact is that I was born and raised in Mombasa, so I am always happy to help. Yeah, but not on this other part. She has all the contacts, and I feel like sometimes when you go to meetups and someone makes like the statement you've made, Maureen, I usually feel like people just like ignore it and they feel like, yeah, I will. I like what Fuad has done. I'm seeing on the chat, she's actually asked for your email. Okay, cool. Yeah, sorry, just continue. Yeah.
All right, so that's great to know, and thank you, Frank. That was an amazing session, and I felt like we could even have more time for you to talk about everything that you've done with GetX, because I'm seeing I got several insights, especially on your learnings and how you've interacted with it personally. So thank you for that. Do we have any other question from the audience?
Oh, there was one that forwarded us, like courses that you would recommend, like a preferred detailed course content. Okay, as others might post on the link, I'll give you free advice that was given with learning any new technology. It's pick up some UI, pick up a project that you actually want to implement, and let it not be small. So as you go through implementing it, you will be learning the core of it all, and then you can always do a patch up of like going deeper into it. So that's what I'd say. And actually move, nowadays I move towards it's like there's like, yes, there are pros and cons for this approach that I'm telling you. So you can go and say, I want to build a project. Yes, you're starting from scratch, but I want to learn to build a project. And not like, that's what I'm really against all these counter applications that people give us demos. I usually feel like it's like insulting for us to come to a meetup and then they're telling us, yeah, this is how you do stake management. And then they give us a counter application. I'm like, you've not helped me, give me something like this broader, I'm moving like 4 or 5 screens and you're showing me how it moves. This is how you're handling that state from one screen to the other till the end. This is how you're actually implementing this feature. I feel like that's usually best. In terms of like courses, there are some, there's others that actually would say, I've seen guys recommend the one for London App Brewery. Recently, I think Flutter was doing one where there was a partnership with Ray Wanderlich where they were doing a book on Flutter. I don't know how that went. But I am not the best person to talk about this. Fuad, I guess just reach out to Maureen on Twitter. I know she's like active there. I'm not active like that much. I'm struggling with Twitter. I need to get for classes for those things. So I wouldn't really have anything extra to add on that. Yeah. But nowadays I'm looking at very interesting things in terms of like security, architecture, and like network calls. And yeah, that's what has interested me nowadays. So yeah. So maybe Maureen, you could help on that side. I am not good in that part. Yeah.
Thank you, no worries. So plus to whatever Frank has added, there is also this course on Udemy. I'm not sure if it's still there, by Andrew, I think. Wait, I've forgotten his name. So I'll combine all the resources, then let you send it over to you on email, especially after the call, on resources on how to get started with Flutter. There are some courses that can help someone to get started. The London App Brewery plus other courses on Udemy.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking, and thanks, Frank, for answering. So someone is also requesting for a physical meetup in Nairobi. I want to say,
make it happen. Make it happen. But this is Flutter Kisumu, so I don't know why they wanted to do it in Nairobi.
Yeah, so just an announcement. I had made it from the start of the call. We have a physical meetup in Kisumu next month. So anyone who has never been to Kisumu or looking forward to come to Kisumu, we have Flutter Kisumu Festival in March 26th. You're all welcomed.
Awesome.
Yeah. So other than that, do we have any other question? And if there's no any other question, I'll give it up to Okoth to end the session.
Yeah, hello. Thank you very much, Maureen. Thank you, Frank. Thank you for finding time to join us. And yeah, I'm sorry, there's a fluctuation. I'm in Kisumu and there was an electric problem here. I don't know why. Lest we have a lot of rivers flowing over this place. I don't know, there's a lot of electricity problems. So yeah, like Maureen has mentioned, so I think a lot of resources, Maureen has written a lot of resources with regards to getting started with Flutter. And I think we'll share the links to those resources, especially they're in Medium, I believe so. We can share those. And also, this session is being recorded, so we'll share once the video has been edited, we'll share the link, we'll put it on YouTube, and also the resources which have been mentioned here. We'll also liaise with Frank so that he can give us the presentation so that we can also share it with you. So generally in a few days, probably a week or two, we'll share everything which has been mentioned in this meeting. Yeah, so with that, I believe there are no more questions or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okot, I have a question. Maybe you could just clarify and tell them where they'll get the resources. Yeah, just
okay.
tell
We
them where
usually
they'll
share
get it.
them
Yeah.
So we usually share them for those who are RSVP'd to this event. We usually share them via Meetup. So we usually share we send email through that, so it will come to your inbox probably. I don't know whether there's a better way of doing that, but that's usually the way we try to maximize. I mean, getting as many people as we can, because we usually go to RSVP lists. Because the reason why we do that is we don't usually want to spam people first. So if you are RSVP'd, we'll share it with you there. Yeah. Yeah. So that's how it's done. So you'll give us a week or two maximum, and then we'll share it with you. And yeah. So like Maureen mentioned, we'll be having our physical event next month here in Kisumu. So we're still sourcing for speakers, and yeah, so if you're interested to come to Kisumu physically, you can also come if you want to share with us something. The speaker room is still open. Yeah. With that, I think the meeting is over, and I'll hand it over for Maureen to close it officially, so that she can end the meeting. Thank you.
All right, no worries. So thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Frank, for finding time and space. I know it was a struggle since you are attending a physical event. We appreciate your time and all the wisdom that you poured to us today. Thank you everyone for spending maybe an hour of your day with us here today, and have a lovely Saturday. Bye.